Beedel, good morning. Good to see you.
Good morning, Chris. How are you?
I'm absolutely fine, thanks, Chris. We're talking this morning with Chris Beedel, who's the head of advocacy and stakeholder relations at the GGF, mainly because you've just had a piece of research done, if you like, to try and look at this whole question of the government's energy company obligation, what they call ECO plus scheme, and the heat and building strategy. From what I understand, this particular document that's come out leaves glazing out of the whole question of energy saving, which just seems amazing. I wonder if you can comment on that.
Yeah, I can, Chris. It's with great sadness, actually, that quite a lot of the information that arrives doesn't actually have glazing down as an energy efficiency measure, whereas we all know that it is. And in many ways, we feel like we're the poor relations compared to the insulation and other industries. And we're really advocating a fabric first approach because, we are a big part of the building fabric, and we need to make sure that glazing is considered alongside all of the other important insulation measures. So we've done a piece of research, which I know we're going to talk about today, which is very, very exciting. And as a result of that, we've developed a very simple to follow infographic, which tells an amazing story. And we're going to be using that and putting that in front of government and other stakeholders to raise the awareness of glazing, to make sure that it is an integral part of the building fabric measures moving forward.
I mean, is it a case of other sectors having greater pull with government? And is that pull all to do with the dodgy dealings we seem to hear from government these days?
I don't think I could comment on that last statement. But what I can say to you is that what we need to do is build on facts and data. So some other measures are seen as low-hanging fruit, and that's why they got the initial attention, because they were easy to retrofit. They were fairly cost-effective to retrofit as well. But a lot of that work's already been done now, loft insulation, wall, some floor insulation as well. So it's high time that glazing was front and center of any future measures.
I mean, is the claim of, I believe it was 86% of homes have double glazing, is that accurate?
Well, this is based on an English housing survey from 2013, which is now 10 years old. It actually has quite a small sample size, so that the sample for the survey was 12,500 occupied or vacant dwellings where a physical inspection was carried out, and includes 12,000 cases where an interview with the household was also secured. What it actually states is that the vast majority, 80% of homes, were fully double glazed, and a further 10% had more than half of their windows double glazed. So I think that's how we've got to that figure of 85 or 86%, depending on who you speak to.
I mean, I find that amazing, considering the aging housing stock in this country, that it's actually as high as that. I mean, looking out of my windows, which are single glazed, I'm just one of that 14%, I guess.
Yeah, well, single glazing makes up between 5 and 6% of the market, depending on who you speak to and which data that you look at. But look, the crux here is that many government officials and stakeholders see this figure of 85%. And when you read it and it says 85% of all homes are double glazed, they think, well, job done. Double glazing is good. It's a progression on from single glazing. It's obviously doing a really good job. It's a tick in the box. So we can focus our attention elsewhere. And of course, this is untrue. And we know this because windows installed pre-2002 are going to have a U value of around 2.8 to 3.2, compared to windows installed today with a minimum U value of 1.4, and in many cases, much better. So you can't compare old double glazing with new double glazing. There's the technology and innovation over the last 20 years. It's immeasurable. What we do need to do, Chris, is come up with a new language. So if we're talking double glazing to double glazing, we actually need to talk about maybe first generation, second generation, third generation, as they do with other technologies, so we can actually see the incremental changes that have taken place over the years.
Yeah, that kind of makes sense. I mean, in that research that you've done, it actually talks about us being one of the worst performing in Europe for heat loss from residential homes. I mean, that's got to be a real concern, surely, for the government.
Yeah, absolutely. If you look at the map of Western Europe, and this is in our infographic, it shows that, we are the worst performing, and we're actually 3 times worse performing than Germany. So it's well worth having a look. Now, the government is starting to address this through their research and calculations into the Future Homes Standard, which will be available from 2025. And late last year in 2022, representatives from the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities met with the GGF and many of the GGF members to discuss glazing and what's possible now as double glazing and what might be possible in the future. And whilst we've got to await the outcome of their work, and there will be a consultation this year on this for sure, they're very interested in the idea of triple glazing for new homes and much lower U values. And there are numbers being bandied around. We'll have to wait for the consultation to arrive before we can actually see. But numbers as low as 0.80 have been spoken about. So quite a difference between the repair, maintenance, improvement sector, which has minimum view values of say 1.4, to potentially where new build housing may be going in the future.
But I mean, if the heat loss or the energy loss is 44.4%, I think, from your document, can glazing really alleviate the problem and bring it right down to the standard of 22%?
Absolutely, it can. And this was the piece of exciting research that the GGF undertook. We partnered with British Glass on this, and we went to Elmhurst Energy Consulting, and we asked them the question about heat loss in homes. And we were trying to get a better understanding, and they actually came up with a diagram that showed something like 10% heat loss through windows and 15% through doors, which was generally accepted as an industry sort of standard. And we felt that this really did need challenging. So we challenged and we went back through that. And that was actually a piece of information that was done on a regeneration program in Belfast, looking at Victorian terrace houses. So it wasn't representative of the housing stock that we have today. So we undertook this piece of research, and it's 130 pages of research that Elmhurst have generated for us, which is amazing. But when you have a look at our infographic, and I know you have, Chris, you'll see on page 2 houses. One is in green, one is in red, another one is in green. The one that's in red is an average house. So we've taken 5 property archetypes. We've taken them over date ranges from 1890 to present day, and we've come up with an average property. That average property has had the benefit of wall, floor, low energy lighting, and also solar thermal where that's appropriate to be installed. And it still has a heat loss through windows of 44%. So technically the heat load of the building has actually come down because of the good energy efficiency measures that have already been installed, and many of those will have been installed under government schemes. But you then take that same improved property and you change the windows and doors to current standards, and you see that the heat loss drops from 44% to 22%. So that's a 22% saving by replacing old double glazing with new double glazing. And the next thing we're going to do, Chris, is to actually do the modelling looking at triple glazing as well, to see how far towards zero that will actually become.
It just still seems amazing, doesn't it? If the government are talking about looking at the whole building envelope and they leave glazing out of the calculation.
Yeah, it's a fabric first approach. And, whilst there's a lot of good research going on, there's a lot of good thinking, there's no point in putting a low carbon heating system, such as say a heat pump in a building, which is poorly insulated. Yeah. So, insulation has to be first and foremost, and glazing has to be a major part of that.
Can we talk about the proportion of A, B and C rated windows in the UK? We had the new rating requirements, didn't we, from June 2022? Just where do we stand with the difference between A, B and C at the current time?
Okay, well, windows to the previous building regulations would have been generally a C or above because of the minimum requirement. And now that's moved towards the B. And so the BFRC rating is a fantastic system because we call it the rainbow label, because it's exactly the same energy efficiency type of label that homeowners see on white goods like TVs and fridges, so they can automatically identify with it and see how products perform. So it's really, really important. But then if you look at double glazing that's pre-2002, you know, that's well down the scale. That could be down in the E rating. And if you look at single glazing, that's unclassified. So if you put those two together, that represents 28% of windows in the UK market, which is 80 million windows that are sort of E or unclassified. And that's why it's really urgent that those are considered for replacement now, because all of that good heat energy is actually going out of those old windows that don't meet today's standards. And, you know, that's testament to our industry, Chris. You know, the innovation in technology that we see year on year, let alone over the last 10 or 20 years, means that, you know, double glazing 10 years ago is not the same as double glazing today.
Sorry, can you just go back over that? You're saying that what proportion need replacing in order to comply with regulations?
Well, what I'm actually saying there is that any windows installed pre-2002, of which we calculated about 80 million windows, could do with replacing, because what they would be replacing windows which are 50% more energy efficient than those that had been installed before. So that's why it's vitally important that, you know, this infographic is considered for all future government schemes, especially where there are grant systems available, but also a higher awareness that, you know, just because you have double glazing doesn't actually mean it's performing as well as it could. And that's why, you know, homeowners, social landlords, et cetera, you know, should consider it as part of the overall mix of, you know, improving the housing stock and making homes better and warmer. And that also translates into the energy costs and energy bills as well, and the savings that homeowners would make immediately and in future years.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that. I mean, if those windows were replaced, what would that mean in the reduction of CO2? And what would it actually mean in pounds per annum savings?
Yeah, well, we've also calculated this, Chris, and it's staggering, absolutely staggering. So if all of the pre-2000 double glazing was replaced, it would see a reduction of 3.16 million tons of CO2. And that's the equivalent of taking 1.88 million cars off the road. So it's quite a compelling argument, isn't it? But it would also see a household saving, which we've also calculated using the GGF calculator, of £467 on energy bills. And that's at the current cap rates. So that could obviously increase after June when the cap rate actually runs out. So those 80 million windows, you know, they do need replacing, but, you know, every household, if they replace their windows, would see, you know, somewhere in the region of a household saving of £467 and possibly even more. And if you consider that over the lifetime of the windows, you know, that's an excellent return on investment. If you then say, well, if we took all of the pre-2002 windows, then the energy saved across all of those homes would be in the region of £4.1 billion. So again, big numbers, which is savings for homeowners, you know, in a difficult period, which we're all going through at the moment. But it's also the CO2 that's going to be saved. And that's really important because government's net zero agenda, which is a legal requirement, you know, it just goes to show the contribution that windows and doors and our industry can actually make to that really, really important agenda.
Trying to get that through to government, though, is the tricky part, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It is. We have seen a lot of changes in government and government officials over the last year or two. So we're going to be talking to senior civil servants, but we're also going to be talking where we can to ministers. And I'm very excited to tell you that we've got a meeting set up with Grant Shapps, who is the Secretary of State for the new Department for Energy Security and Net Zero. And all being well, that will take place in about 3 weeks' time. And that's our opportunity to show him the work that we've done and to put this infographic in front of him and to make him aware of the contribution that our industry can make to net zero. So that's a very exciting prospect. And we're also lining up other meetings as well. So it's not just about England and Wales. We're also looking at Scotland and Northern Ireland too. So this infographic will actually serve to, show some of those big numbers, show the contributions, but also to show where we stand, as we've already mentioned, in relation to other countries in Western Europe. So there's a lot that we can do, and it's an exciting time for our industry because we know that we can make that difference.
Yeah, it's interesting actually. You mentioned the rest of Europe, because I noticed also from the research that the greatest heat loss is saved in the coldest climates. In other words, Norway, Sweden, Germany, Austria. Is that to do with their building methods, or is that something to do with triple glazing?
It's a real mixture, Chris, actually. It's climate, it's regulations, it's technology too. So as it was said, if the Future Home Standard does have a requirement for, say, triple glazing and lower U values, those are already being seen on the continent. So, windows and doors with triple glazed units, maybe different gas fills, etc., are already being made elsewhere. So the government has an eye on that. They can see that the technology is there and available. But in fairness, we will need a transition period. If it's their will that we get to those kind of values, the industry will need time to gear up and retool. It also shows that there'd be quite a differential between new build and the replacement market. So if the new build does go towards triple glazing and low U values, the repair, maintenance and improvement sector, it's unlikely that the U value, a minimum of 1.4, is going to change in the near future. No one can say that for certain, but government has said it's unlikely. So we will have quite a big differential there putting into new build versus what's actually going to the repair, maintenance and improvement sector. But look, there's lots of differences in approach in Europe and worldwide, and that's something we're very keen to understand. So the GGF is undertaking some work with our European and worldwide partners as well, to actually looking at the similarities and differences in approach, so that we again have more information and data on this, as future consultations arise.
And which are the big culprits then when it comes to emissions, and where does residential homes come in that table?
Well, residential homes is around 24% of all emissions, and transport and business aren't much higher. But importantly, it's the sector which has had the slowest decline in carbon emissions over the last 30 years. So we've seen the revolution in electric vehicles that's started and is coming. We've seen that businesses are looking for alternative fuels and ways of say process manufacturing, using different fuels or working differently. So the residential sector is very slow to decline. We have a very old population of many buildings, and we need to do something about that. And that's the exciting thing. You can actually make quite a big difference by changing your windows and doors. And that's exactly what we're advocating.
I mean, you've calculated in that research, there's 290 million windows. I mean, which is a tremendous amount. I mean, what proportion of those are actually below the B rating currently required?
Probably over 90%, Chris.
Right.
Because we've got double glazing and also, as we mentioned before, single glazing too. So, it's a big proportion of the windows out there. So, 290 million, it's a huge number, isn't it? And if you think the building regulations change, from time to time, so every time they change, effectively, what's gone on before may not actually meet those requirements. But, it's worth saying that the building regulations are the minimum requirements. And what that doesn't mean is that companies aren't installing windows that are better than that. So, you will see that the minimum requirement, say, is a B, but, a lot of A-rated windows are going in A+ and probably A++ too. So, we are a progressive industry, but there are minimum requirements that have to be achieved.
So, I mean, this means there's a huge opportunity for our industry, really, doesn't it? But the only snag being that the poor people who've got to find the disposable income to buy the new windows.
Cost is always an issue. And, when we have spoken to government, or there have been questions asked in the House about energy saving materials, zero VAT, government usually says that windows and doors represent a poor return on investment. But again, that's not strictly true, is it now? So as we've spoken about earlier, we're saying, the average saving for a property could be in the region of £467, and that's every year. So that's on their energy bills at the current cap rates. But it's also worth mentioning that there are a number of lenders out there who are looking at green mortgages and cashback schemes. So we've seen quite a few where, replacing windows and doors, a mortgage company will give you, say, £500 towards them, on the evidence of, showing an invoice or maybe a FENSA certificate to prove that. So if you add that, say £500 cash back to a saving of £467, call that around £1,000 in year one. That's a pretty good return on investment, and you're going to get, money year on year in terms of the energy savings that you'll make. So, there are schemes out there. There are obviously finance packages available as well. So, it shouldn't be just a headline figure that puts people off, because, they should be talking to their lenders. They should be talking to other green financiers who have a huge interest in this market, and they will actually be those that will probably drive quite a lot of change.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, from your research, if you replace all the windows that you say need replacing, have you actually come up with a tonnage figure of what CO2 would be saved?
We have, and it's absolutely staggering. So if we were to replace all the single glazing, then it would save 2.8 million tons of CO2. If we were to then replace all the pre-2002 double glazing, it would be 3.16 million tons. So just shy of 6 million tons of CO2. But importantly, because it's useful, what does that actually look like? And no one knows what that looks like. So if we actually, take an equivalent, that's the equivalent of taking just over 3.5 million cars off the road. So, that's the benefit, and that's the opportunity. And that's why it's so important that, glazing is seen by government and other stakeholders, as part of the solution towards net zero. And that's why we'll be taking this new piece of research and the infographic that we've been talking about and putting it in front of as many people as we can and having those informed discussions.
I mean, it's one thing, isn't it, talking about glazing and saving energy and all those good things. But there's also far more to it. I mean, there's the noise transmission, there's security, all those things, which are very, very important. I mean, do you feel as if you're banging your head against a brick wall when you're talking to government about these things?
Well, unlike other insulation measures, which are passive, aren't they? They sit above ceilings, behind plasterboard. Windows and doors play a huge part in our daily lives. So they're very, very interactive. And they have a number of benefits. It's not just energy efficiency, as you've seen. And in fact, before the building regulations changed and approved document L came in, they were there for other means, weren't they? So, yes, I remember learning, I think it's called the Maslow triangle. I don't know if you remember that, Chris, which looked at the base needs, didn't it? And kind of, if you think about that, the windows and doors serve those base needs. So the first thing they do is that they keep us safe and secure. And then they keep us warm. Some are fire rated, fire egress hinges, which allow us to escape from a building in the event of a fire. So there are many, many, many facets to windows and doors. And as I say, we interact with them all the time. So we're very used to them. We don't see loft insulation very often. We don't see external wall or, other types of insulation. They're there and they're doing a very important job, but they're passive, whereas ours is very, very interactive. And there's also an element to it as well, isn't there? Because people will also change their windows and doors on the basis of aesthetics, maybe, the color of the windows, the style of them, etc. So, we're more than just energy efficiency. We are a lifestyle choice in many regards.
I mean, all your research is based on current requirements. I've got to ask, what happens when the new building regulations reduce to, 1.2 watts per meter squared Kelvin for replacement windows, and could be as low as 0.8 when it comes to new build?
I think, in many cases that will be for the market to decide, but you can see a scenario where, new build windows, if they do go to triple glazing and low U values of say 0.8, industry will have to perhaps have new lines, new machinery, new resources, new buildings potentially to make those. And so you can see a time where you'd have, double glazing, a line making that for the replacement market, and perhaps another completely new or different line for the new build standard. So I think that that will be an interesting time to actually see the pull through of technology. So it'll be interesting to see whether what's happening in the new build market then starts to trickle into the replacement market. So something very much for the market to decide over time, but you can sort of see a divergence of requirements where a new build will, be much higher in terms of its energy efficiency requirements compared to the replacement market.
So your job now is getting all this research in front of government and civil service. You're starting with Grant Shapps. Have you got plans how confident are you that you can get this in front of the right people?
Well, being the Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero, which is a brand new department, which was only created in early February, we're very lucky to have the opportunity to go and speak with him about this. And there are a number of takeaways. So in terms of the infographic that we've put together, which we've been discussing today, it tells that story, doesn't it? A very simple story, which is very easy to understand. The UK housing stock has the worst heat loss performance in Western Europe and has seen one of the worst carbon reductions of all sectors since about 1990. Windows installed today perform 50% better than older double glazing and 70% better than single glazing. And so incentivizing homeowners to increase the energy rating of windows is necessary, especially those which have a rating of, say, E or unclassified, which, as we've mentioned, is in the region of 80 million windows out there that could do with replacing straight away and would make such a difference. Replacing windows and doors, it should absolutely be at the forefront. It's got to be front and center of any future energy efficiency schemes and policy. And as we've seen, it could reduce heat loss by up to 22% on the average home. And lastly, we've also mentioned that, it's not just about energy efficiency. Windows and doors will help reduce noise transmission, provide enhanced security. So, it's a whole package. And it's something that we're very keen to get out there to make sure that our message is heard. So, representing the industry, which the GGF does, we are speaking to, a number of senior civil servants. We'll be speaking to MPs as well, but other industry partners too, because now that we have this really important piece of research and it's there in black and white on the graphic, that's a great platform for us to build on now, and that's what we'll be doing over the coming months.
Well, we certainly look forward to hearing about your progress, and good luck with that. And Chris Beedel, Head of Advocacy and Stakeholder Relations at GGF, thank you very much for your time today.